My earliest association started with Karanji in 1968 when I joined Deshantar, and I had just finished college and joined school, and I had the real privilege of working in Deshantar at that time with Om Shivpuri and Sudha Shivpuri. So we were rehearsing Adhe Adhure, and almost side by side. Now my memory for dates is not so sharp, but soon after my association with Adhe Adhure, with Om and Sudha Shivpuri, Karanji was beginning to rehearse Haivadan, and it was a Deshantar production. So many of the people I knew were either working with Karanji or working with Om Shivpuri. So I remember the early production with Vishwamohan Badola, and as it happens, and it's an interesting detail which I think we all tend to forget, that many of my schoolmates, young actors from modern school, were part of Haivadan, the initial performances. So that's when I knew him, and that's when I began to actually see his method of work. And the most magical aspect, of course, was the way that he brought in music and theatre together. And that is when I heard him say one of his most popular, as it were, lines, which was that गाना ऐसे गाइए जैसे बात कर रहे हैं और बात ऐसे करिए जैसे गाना गा रहे हैं. So all these things we remember. So that was my first association, and a kind of great admiration for him developed. And to that extent, he was not formally my teacher, but informally I had the opportunity of having Karanji as in my mind as a teacher and a visionary sort of education person, and Om Shivpuri in Deshantar. So that's when it began. Well, I saw Tughlaq. I saw the performance, and it was an extraordinarily riveting performance. And the last of the performances, I think Om Shivpuri wounded himself with a knife in that performance, and I remember him limping. So it was a kind of, a detail of performance at that time, and Delhi performances at that time, that in this fantastic performance of Tughlaq, this is what had happened. But that these texts, the directors, the translations, all came out at that time and were, in a way, it's a sort of very major period for Indian theatre. Another thing I remember, that Karanji was, his command of languages, in the sense, that he could do a translation, he could write up a lyric, all that was very much to the fore when we met him at that time. I would say that some of the greatest performances at that time were through Deshantar, because there was the repertory, and then there was all the very senior and stellar actors of the NSD, like Om and Shivpuri and Sudha and B.M. Shah and Karanji and Prema. I think it was certainly this generation and Om and Sudha and Karanji and Shahji that actually put the stamp of performance that became, let's say, the NSD drama. And I think it came out equally at the Deshantar experience as it did in the repertory. So I would say that some of the greatest performances at that time were through Deshantar. And Haivadan was a major breakthrough. It was a new kind of theatre. People hadn't seen it. I was with Deshantar from 68 to about 73, 74 when Om Shivpuri left for Bombay. And in 76, I left for England, and I returned in 81. And that's when I made contact again with Karanji, because I joined the NSD. He was just leaving for Bharat Bhavan. Karanji brought in visionary changes in the drama school. For one very major change was that I think he brought in many different kinds of inputs, different kinds of people to direct, larger number of students, and I think that for a while he also took away specialization. Now, one may see that in both ways. I think perhaps in today's world it's important, but I think he was stressing something, that a young theatre person must know everything about the theatre, shouldn't specialize beforehand. So while we have gone back to specialization, but we have taken care with the vision of Karanji that the first year the students get to understand skills of every kind, whether costume, whether computer, whether color wheels, whether carpentry, acting, improvisation, and then they choose, so that they're more equipped to choose. That was one. And I think the other one was his great belief, and I think a very major belief in learning by immersion. So he started two things that I think they had a far-reaching effect in the drama school. One was what we call the extension program, which is the outreach program, where he was very clear that people who have not, will not, or are likely not to have the opportunity or the time to give 3 years to training, we must start workshops that reach people rather than they reach us. So that was something that he started. And I think that that has actually built a kind of cadre of young people over the years. And the other thing that he started was that a kind of research come practice tour to another region of the country which is rich in a traditional or folk or urban form, where the students lived and researched and performed. So that learning by immersion was something that he brought in the second year of the students. And I think that is a very, very major and again visionary input. And lastly, I think, was his very focused understanding of looking at various forms and how they can be developed into the contemporary, and which is what he then explored when he went to Bharat Bhavan. Karanji had, I think, visions of having training schools. Whether they were duplicates of NSD, I'm not so sure. But I think that that is why he actually did set up that extension program, where he was wanting training, a kind of circulation of skills to be made by. Now, the school has set up the drama school in Bangalore, and we hope that it will become academically functional in July this year as a course which is similar to but also different in many ways to the National School of Drama. So I think the dream that training should be available to people not in one institute but in several is a very real dream, and I hope that continues to take shape. I think in a world of globalization, countries of the South like ourselves just don't have access to the kind of information that either to make or to circulate it. Then I come to the second point. I think there should have been much more written and documented about Karanth than we actually have. So Karanth's work may have traveled at that time, but the effects of globalization have only been now. Now more work travels. Now there are more festivals. Now there are more opportunities to share work. When Karanth was active, it was hardly there. So there was some festivals of India, and that was about it. But I think Karanth's work as a body of thinking about Indian theatre is understood and as a major input into Indian modernisms, as a theoretical position, sometimes as a practical one, but not nearly as enough as it should have been, I think. I just mean to say that I think he was a visionary, and he was interested from the very start to make many counter narratives, whether it's a counter narrative to realism, Stanislavski, whether it's a counter narrative to spoken drama, speech orientated drama, whether it was a counter narrative to, let us say, kind of proscenium traditions. So everywhere he was looking at things which, he was creating a circulation, a turbulence, and he was not interested in making one model. Like many major directors are associated with one kind of work. I think Karan did every kind of work, and that is why I would say he's a visionary, and a fearless visionary. He'd do a musical play, he would try a text play, he would try a folk tale, he would try Sanskrit plays, anything. And I think what was interesting, therefore, and something that I think we all learn and are inspired by, is that he just, the love of playmaking and a kind of interest in saying what's today, what's happening today. So he was in touch with the here and now, I think, which was very special, and which I think we all would remember as being a most major, contribution to theatre practice in the last 50 years.